Now, I can't tell you with any degree of certainty that Andor was a financial success for Disney while Obi-Wan Kenobi wasn't. Andor's viewing numbers certainly didn't match up against the likes of The Mandalorian or Obi-Wan Kenobi, although the sharp increase of viewership for the final episode is unusual for Disney Plus shows, which typically lose about 10% of their audience between premiere and finale. That being said, as far as writing, acting, and action go, Andor beats Obi-Wan Kenobi by a mile. So naturally, I'm here to explain why, and we'll start with the action, because well, it's called Star Wars. Obviously, the characters and the plot are and always have been important in Star Wars, but the prequels are a testament to the fact that if you have some great action sequences and lots of memeable moments, you can win your way into the hearts of a generation despite having absolutely abysmal dialogue and character development. Well-directed fight and battle scenes are crucial to any story in the Star Wars universe. And so I was greatly relieved when I watched Andor and discovered that its action scenes were sensical. They had natural flow and progression. The characters' actions had weight, their choices had consequences. They stood in stark contrast to the fight scenes in Kenobi that can be summed up in one word: fluff. So, let's compare a couple of the fight scenes from each show and I'll show you what I mean. In one corner, we have the brief action sequence from Andor's first episode, in which Cassian is held up by 2 corporate security guards. In the other corner, we have Obi-Wan facing off against 4 stormtroopers who are also holding him at gunpoint. The premises of the scenes are similar enough for comparison, so let's start by looking at our combatants. Cassian's opponents are drunk security guards who think they found an easy mark from whom they can extort some quick cash. Obi-Wan is facing off against Imperial stormtroopers who are actively hunting a Jedi Master they know is on this planet. It's important to note this. Who the combatants are should dictate how they act. In the case of Andor, it absolutely does, but in the Kenobi show, it doesn't. The characters just don't act consistently. Andor's harassers have him at a complete disadvantage. They are on their home turf and they are armed, while he is not, letting them dictate the encounter. They want him ill at ease, uncomfortable, and scared, hence why Skinny Rent-A-Cop pulls off Cassian's hood, letting the rain pour on his head. The 2 guards stay behind Andor, not wanting him to even turn and look at them, and Fatso delivers a jab with his blaster to emphasize this point. They are taking every advantage they can while robbing Cassian. This makes sense. These are thugs after a quick buck. They're bullies and cowards who have no interest in picking a fight with anyone they think will fight back. They have no reason to believe this lone visitor to their town will cause them any trouble, and they're taking steps to ensure that. By contrast, our Imperial stormtroopers are ready for trouble. They know a Jedi is loose on Mapuzo. We've seen troopers actively looking for Obi-Wan, and despite the fact that they found him purely by happenstance, they didn't recognize him because I guess the Empire is too incompetent to distribute images of the man being hunted to the troops hunting him. But anyway, because they know a Jedi is loose, they call in a probe droid to check on Obi-Wan's identity. These stormtroopers are clearly on high alert. You might think, then, that they would position themselves accordingly. But no, 2 of them, at least, just face Obi-Wan. They stand right where he can see them. There's a 3rd trooper up in the guard tower, and a 4th one completely unaccounted for. You'd think he'd be right behind Obi-Wan or just off to the side, but no, he's just off camera. Maybe he's talking to Obi-Wan and Leia's driver, but why? The driver is known to them, and they are, if I may say it again, hunting a Jedi. Maybe keeping an eye on the strangers from the back of this vehicle should take priority here. You might be wondering, why do these 2 Rent-A-Cops have a clearer understanding of the advantages gained by remaining out of your target's eyeline than do the stormtroopers of the 3rd Galactic Reich? At least, I hope you're wondering that, because I certainly am. Would anyone care to explain to me why the 3 stormtroopers on the ground do not form a triangle around Obi-Wan, 1 in front and 2 behind? That would seem to be the logical thing to do, cutting off his avenues of escape and ensuring at least one of them remains out of his sight at all time. What advantage do these 2 troopers have to gain by standing directly in front of Obi-Wan? Why isn't that 3rd trooper involved at all? The answer to all these questions, of course, is because that is how the scene was directed. In Andor, the characters act according to their, character. The cowardly thugs act like you'd expect cowardly thugs to act, attempting to make their prey uncomfortable and weak, since they themselves are uncomfortable and weak, emboldened only by their advantages of outnumbering Andor and bringing a blaster to rob an unarmed opponent. In Obi-Wan Kenobi, the stormtroopers act like dumb, generic, cannon fodder bad guys. And yeah, in some ways that's what stormtroopers are and always have been. We all love to dump on stormtroopers for their incompetence, especially when it comes to their accuracy. But setting the memes aside, these are soldiers of the Empire. They do not, or at least should not, mess around and slack off, especially not when facing someone they suspect to be a Jedi. All 4 of them should be focused on Obi-Wan. They should have had him move away from the transport so he couldn't use it for cover from the trooper in the guard tower. And at least one of the other 3 troopers should be behind him and, actually paying attention. But of course that's not what happens, because the Kenobi show has no logical consistency in its action scenes. This is well documented. Obi-Wan reveals his blaster in preparation to draw it, which at least one of the stormtroopers should plainly see happen, but doesn't because convenience, and then draws his blaster and shoots the probe droid, which causes the troopers to reel in shock instead of just shooting him because convenience. I cannot stand it when a character is being held at gunpoint and then is allowed to do whatever he wants and somehow not get shot. But, Master Samwise, I hear you ask, isn't that what Andor does? No. Close, but no. Watch carefully. Yes, Cassian is being held at blaster point. He takes action, and he manages to dodge the subsequent plasma bolt. But it's done so much better here. I'll show you why. Point 1. This fat, drunk corporate security guard actually gets a shot off quite quickly, whereas 2 Imperial stormtroopers did not. And of course he fired a shot. He's surprised and probably more than a little scared that this presumably easy target is actually fighting back. Point 2. Cassian chooses his moment precisely. He lets Skinny Rent-A-Cop search his coat before telling him,
"Oh, the pocket,"
causing Skinny to move towards Andor's side where the blaster is being pointed at his head. This causes a momentary distraction as the 2 Rent-A-Cops share a glance, and then Skinny starts to move over, causing Fatty to have to move his blaster and giving Cassian an opening to headbutt Skinny. The main difference between the first moments of these confrontations is the weight attached to each character's actions. Obi-Wan essentially gets to do whatever he wants without any consequences, in part due to poor planning by the stormtroopers, and in part due to them acting like little schoolgirls when he pulls a gun on them. If he can get away with that, what can't he get away with? There's no planning, no manipulation of the situation on Obi-Wan's part. He just shoots the droid and gets insanely lucky that he isn't shot dead right then and there. Why not have him force pull the droid to himself, using it to block the blaster fire that should come from the stormtroopers, then slice it in half and send the 2 halves flying back at the troopers in front of him? I mean, he does have a lightsaber. Surely he'd be more comfortable with that, the weapon he has honed his skill with for decades, rather than a weapon that he deems
so uncivilized.
But no, that would be logically consistent and way cooler to look at, so we can't have him doing that. He has to do the first thing that came into the writer/director's head. Seriously, what were the directions given to these stormtroopers actors? Hey, yeah, he's gonna pull his blaster and shoot the droid. Oh, so I shoot at him and he deflects it with his lightsaber? No. Those lightsabers are way too expensive to animate. Just reel in shock like if you've never seen gunfire before. Contrast that with the direction of the initial counter in the Andor scene, which is slowly built up to as Cassian forms his plan in his head. He's well aware that he's risking his life here, but he reasons that fighting is his only way out of this mess. As I've already said, he chooses his moment and takes quick, decisive, unpredictable action, taking the Rent-A-Cops by surprise, whereas Obi-Wan very clearly prepares to take action in full view of the stormtrooper right next to him. As Skinny moves around behind Andor, our only indicator that Cassian is about to do anything is the expression on his face as he steels himself for the headbutt. It's not telegraphed. It happens in a single, violent moment, very reasonably taking Skinny off guard and square in the face, and causing the momentarily distracted Fatso to be just a hair late in delivering the blaster shot. Where Cassian has to plan, has to manipulate the situation and maneuver the Rent-A-Cops into position, Obi-Wan just gets to act with total impunity because the directing dictates it be so. Obi-Wan is a powerful Jedi Master with a lightsaber and a multitude of force powers, but this scene has him act like a discount space John Wick because he's sad and doesn't want to use the Force? I mean, it works out for him, but not because he's especially skillful, fast, or accurate. Everyone just lets him do his thing because he's the main character. For example, after he shoots the droid, one of the 2 stormtroopers does actually manage to get a shot off. Conveniently, it's the one on screen. Where is this trooper aiming? That's where Obi-Wan was standing 2 full seconds ago. Surely the other trooper has a clear shot though, right? No, he's off screen and is therefore completely irrelevant. He reappears moments later, doing something, I guess. Why is he moving away from Obi-Wan? If he doesn't want to shoot for fear of hitting his comrade, he should at least try to tackle or grapple with Obi. But no, he's pivoting away from him like his blaster is a basketball and Obi-Wan is playing defense. There's no logical reason he should be doing whatever he's doing right here, but he is, so Obi-Wan can go on his murder spree unhindered. So saith the director. Now, I've seen the argument that this is slow down. Obi-Wan is just moving at incredible speed. He's a Jedi, after all. To which I say, no, it is not. Obi-Wan and the stormtroopers are moving at the same speed. The troopers are just incredibly incompetent. Yes, Jedi are capable of moving at ridiculous speed, if you believe Episode 1, and of course they have incredible reflexes and hand-eye coordination, but none of that is shown here. This is what it looks like when one character is moving at hyperspeed compared to those around him. This is just clumsily directed action. Speaking of clumsy, this stormtrooper grappling with Obi-Wan introduces a theme we see repeated in the next episode, dropping your blaster for no reason whatsoever. As Obi-Wan very gently shoves him aside, Trooper decides he doesn't need this E11 anymore, and it's going in the dirt. His arm barely gets touched by Obi, maybe, and he has plenty of space and time to recover and shoot Obi-Wan in the back if he does the reasonable thing and maintains a grip on his weapon, but nah, he's going to drop it because the director said so. By contrast, see, this is how people actually treat deadly weapons in their possessions. They hold on to them tightly. It takes Cassian multiple attempts slamming the Rent-A-Cop's hand into the ground to free the blaster, and that is after Andor punched this out-of-shape, fat, drunk wannabe cop in the throat and tackled him to the ground. I mean, that had to hurt, and still, Fatty holds onto the blaster for dear life, because, you know, it's his only weapon, and it would really suck if it were to get into the hands of his opponent. To review, corporate security guard, Imperial stormtrooper, wannabe cop, frontline soldier for the Empire, unarmored, armored, fat and drunk, fit and sober. This basically could be the whole video right here. It's absurd how easily stormtroopers in Obi-Wan Kenobi let their blasters fall from their fingers. And honestly, I think the Andor director might have just been as annoyed as I am by it, and so he included this shot specifically to rebut that nonsense. Do you see what I mean when I say that Andor's action scene has weight, whereas Kenobi's lacks it entirely? Actions have consequences in Andor. What each character does directly affects the other characters, who are forced to act and react accordingly. This establishes a grounded, realistic narrative. There are clearly rules here. Kenobi, on the other hand, has no rules. Obi-Wan is simply allowed to do whatever he wants, and the buffoonish stormtroopers happily line up to die. They don't pose the slightest of threats to our hero, despite him being a shell of his former self. It's like he's playing a game on story mode. He's got the biggest case of main character syndrome I've ever seen in an actual main character. Everyone just treats him so gently. For example, after he pushes Butterfingers aside and shoots generic bad guy number 3 in the leg, Butterfingers comes back with a vengeance, and by a vengeance, I mean he gently lays a hand on Obi-Wan's back. Why? Why was grabbing his hood the first thing that came to mind? Why not tackle him? Or at least grab his blaster arm, or better yet, don't drop your blaster and shoot him. Butterfingers basically just presents his arm so Obi-Wan can show off his judo throw while he gets shot at by bad guy number 3, who of course misses. He is a stormtrooper and this is a Star Wars product, after all. Wait, didn't that trooper get shot in the leg? Why is he standing back up? Where's the scorch mark on his armor covering his thigh? Why does the shot to the shoulder drop him immediately? Why doesn't Obi-Wan finish off the trooper he left lying in the dirt after his judo throw? Why does he instead decide he needs to deal with the one in the guard tower who can't see or shoot at him since the transport is in the way? Why does he attempt to sacrifice the life of a random civilian so he can have a shield? Is that the Jedi way? Putting anyone you can between you and your enemies? There's simply no logical consistency here. Why is Obi-Wan doing any of this in this fashion? Why isn't he using his lightsaber? This is all completely out of character. Contrast that with the brief struggle that ensues between Fatty Rent-A-Cop and Cassian, because this is a comparison video and not just me bashing the Kenobi show. Cassian is perfectly in character. We don't know a ton about Andor, but we've seen from Rogue One that he's a scrappy, even brutal fighter who's not afraid to get his hands dirty. As soon as he's evened the odds with Fatso, the fight is all but over. Cassian just has to follow through, and he does so to great effect. The throat punch and the takedown are punchy, staccato, and weighty. They have serious impact and great sound design, which tell the audience that hurt. And yet, Fatty still held on to his blaster in case you need reminding. This stands in stark contrast to the weightless, flowy action where Obi-Wan grapples and shoots. Now, Obi-Wan should be more fluid and graceful in his movements. He's a Jedi, but the stormtrooper's just letting him do whatever without interruption, and the fact that he's using a blaster instead of his lightsaber, a weapon that is much more suited to this fluid action style, make for a weightless, unimpactful action sequence that makes no sense whatsoever once you think about it for the slightest of seconds. Our final nonsense of the Kenobi scene is, of course, the standoff between Obi and the stormtrooper, who, you'll remember, Obi-Wan inexplicably failed to finish off, holding Leia at gunpoint. I have some advice for for our soldier from the 3rd Galactic Reich here. If you're using a child half your height as a human shield, get down behind her. Squat, man, engage your quads. The entire upper half of your body is open for Obi-Wan to shoot at, and that's what he was going to aim for anyway. Or maybe just grab her around the waist with one arm and hold her in front of you. She can't weigh much more than your blaster. Look at her. This is the least effective human shield I've ever witnessed. 90% of the galaxy's population could take out this stormtrooper with ease.
Put it down! Put it down! Very poor choice of words.
I mean, Obi-Wan is very clearly aiming that thing at you, man. Have some agency and tell him to not do that. Or just shoot him, that's fine too. See, if you'd been holding her up in front of you, that blaster bolt would have caught her right in the midsection. Obi-Wan didn't even land a headshot. He barely missed scalping Leia with that plasma bolt. Honestly, I would have respected this show so much more if he had accidentally killed Leia here. We've already shattered canonical consistency into 1,000 pieces. What's one more? Adult Leia from the OT can be a clone. Heck, there could be thousands of Leia clones ready to deploy. The Organas took one look at Leia climbing trees and were like, yeah, we need a backup. Sure, that would have been stupid as shit, but at least it would have been creative and less boringly predictable.
Get him up! He's not breathing.
Here's where you could level an actual criticism against this scene. You could say that it's a bit convenient for Cassian that Skinny did not quickly get up and join in the hand-to-hand scrap. Or you could say it's a bit convenient for the plot that the rent-a-cop slipped, fell, hit his head, and died, causing Cassian to have to off Fatso and making him a wanted murderer. However, it's entirely believable that Skinny died here. It's wet and slippery out. He got caught unawares with a headbutt to the face, and he appears to weigh about as much as my 3-year-olds. So it's no wonder that said headbutt caused him to fall over and hit his head. That kind of stuff happens. People slip in the bathtub, trip on curbs, or get punched in bar fights, fall in just the wrong way, and depart from this world. It goes to show how frail our mortal existence really is, and in Andor, it grounds the show in reality. It tells the audience that actions have consequences. It provides narrative weight to this encounter as it puts the Pre-Mor authority onto Cassian's trail. Obi-Wan's fight with the stormtroopers? It was an action scene for action's sake. Obi-Wan doesn't grow or change from the encounter. There are no consequences for him after he kills 4 stormtroopers. He doesn't even, by his actions, rescue Leia and get them into town safely. No, we can't have that. Obi-Wan has to be rescued by someone else, like this ethnically ambiguous female.
Ann Perkins.
No, not that one. Yeah, her. What was the point of having Obi-Wan take down 4 stormtroopers if, when faced with 4 stormtroopers 5 seconds later, he immediately gives up? The show has just shown us that these buffoons pose no threat whatsoever to Obi-Wan, and may I remind you, he still has a lightsaber. Again, I don't buy the he's out of practice or he cut himself off from the Force arguments because A, that's total nonsense, and B, there's absolutely no way he's more proficient with a blaster than he is with a lightsaber.
So uncivilized.
And that's that. Except it isn't, because these 2 scenes are far from the only action sequences in their respective shows. So, let's compare another 2 scenes that once again will show how well Andor's writers and directors understand narrative weight, actions and consequences, and basic military tactics, while the minds behind Obi-Wan Kenobi believe that all you need for an action scene are flashing lights and your main characters on screen. Allow me to once again set the stage and introduce our combatants. The Andor scene I'll be breaking down happens in Episode 6, The Eye, as the rebels are on the verge of completing their heist but are interrupted by Imperial security forces. A chaotic firefight breaks out between the rebels and the Imperials. The fight at its core tells us one simple thing: blasters are deadly weapons. You might think, well, duh, Master Samwise, of course they are. But this is a surprisingly important point. We'll get to the why soon enough. First, we need to introduce our setting and our characters for the Obi-Wan scene. This particular sequence takes place near the end of Part 4 of the series. Tala and Leia, with Obi-Wan in tow, escape Fortress Inquisitorius. Escaping the place built to hold captured Jedi, that's going to be really difficult. No, it's going to be super easy, barely an Sorry, Disney called because I was about to rip off someone else's original work, and they said they see potential in me, and they want to hire me. Anyhow, our trio of heroes escape the fortress by running and gunning like they're playing Doom on easy mode. I'm going to play you a few clips from Andor, and you tell me what you notice the characters doing. Did you see it? Did you notice how, when faced with opponents armed with blasters, weapons capable of shooting deadly plasma bolts at high speeds, the characters in Andor all did the natural thing and took cover? They do this because they rightly presume that their opponents have some modicum of aiming ability, and if the rebels stand in the open, they are going to get shot. But standing out in the open isn't the only way to get shot. Simply moving out of cover is often enough to earn you a plasma bolt to the abdomen. So when Cassian wants to move, he asks for covering fire. What is covering fire? Just in case anyone who worked or will be working on Kenobi is watching, I'll explain, so you can apply this new knowledge to your next project. Please note that I am not and never was in the military, and so my knowledge on this subject comes only from watching war films and shows and those 3 or 4 times that I played paintball. But even in a game where your opponents are either preteens at a birthday party or tipsy 20 or 30-somethings having a bachelor party, all of whom are using old rented paintball markers that lob slightly lopsided orbs of paint at you, you very quickly learn that if you leave cover for any significant amount of time, even if you are running at top speed, you are going to get paint on your clothes very, very quickly. So if you want to move from cover to cover, and you are currently exchanging fire with an enemy, you ask one or more of your comrades to lay down covering fire. That is, shoot a lot at the enemy that is shooting at you, causing them to drop fully into their cover and allowing you a few moments to scamper to your next position. Everyone got that? Yeah? We good? We understand the most basic of modern military tactics? Awesome. Andor does a great job of showing us why cover and covering fire are so important. When the firefight first breaks out, those who are caught in the open very quickly catch a plasma bolt, including the Imperial traitor who has been the rebels' inside man. This show is not afraid to kill off side characters unceremoniously and without warning, and I appreciate that. This is a firefight. Every combatant on each side stands the risk of getting dropped dead without warning or fanfare. There's no need for overly dramatic death scenes where the mortally wounded side character is somehow able to openly brandish a thermal detonator and survive for an extra minute while everyone ignores them. Sorry, I was heading off on a tangent. Getting back to the matter at hand, the Andor hangar battle is impactful because, again, it has narrative weight. Characters, one we've met and spent significant time with over the past 3 episodes, die in an instant, never to be heard from again. Actions have consequences. When Terramin, having to cover a lot of ground to reach the ship, asks Skeen to cover him, but Skeen only manages to take out one Imperial soldier and then is forced back into cover, Terramin gets shot in the back as he runs, and that's it. He's gone. No season 2 for you. Can you imagine Tala, who at this point in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show was only in her 2nd episode and has had significantly less screen time than Terramin, getting shot and killed so abruptly during their escape scene? No, of course you can't, because this scene has absolutely no weight to it. Tala and Obi-Wan simply run straight ahead, firing with abandon, dropping stormtroopers like they're practice dummies. They didn't even attempt to make this ridiculous sequence more believable by having Obi-Wan use his lightsaber to protect himself and his companions from incoming blaster fire. And they most certainly could have. He'd been using the thing for the past few minutes as they fought their way out of the fortress, and he was quite effective with it. So why on earth did he forget about it now? Why would this Jedi Master, who the show has just shown us to be fully reacquainted with his lightsaber, ditch the weapons he's spent decades with in favor of a primitive blaster?
So uncivilized.
I have absolutely no idea. The answer can't even be the usual one of, well, it looks cooler, because deflecting blaster bolts with a lightsaber is infinitely cooler than using your own blaster. But no, he's going to use a blaster during this escape because logical consistency is the bane of this show's existence. This whole sequence is what I would call a spectacle. It's lots of quick cuts with shots of blasters getting fired, troopers falling over, and of course, lots of flashing lights. It is supposed to titillate the senses, to present something pleasing to our eyes, to convince us that we have watched an action scene, when in fact what we have witnessed is a pile of absolute nonsense. I didn't spend a lot of time on this sequence when I broke down this episode, so I'm going to now. Buckle up. The mad dash begins after the snowspeeders Deus Ex Machina'd their way into the scene and started wreaking havoc, allowing our heroes, and Obi-Wan, a chance to escape. They start by taking out a couple of stormtroopers who are recovering from the initial bombardment of the speeders. Sure, fair enough. The next trooper to fall, though, is this guy. He's on his feet, his weapon is up and ready, his enemies are moving toward him, so what does he do? Well, he takes a few shuffling steps towards them and eats a plasma bolt to the chest. Gee, I don't know. If you are a stormtrooper, a crack soldier assigned to guard Fortress Inquisitorius, don't you think your first instinct when enemies begin to bear down on you would be to pull the trigger of your blaster, not slowly shuffle toward them and into the awaiting arms of death? Again, easy way around this nonsense. Put the lightsaber in Obi-Wan's hands and he can deflect the trooper's shot back at him. But no, we're fine just having the stormtroopers be completely incompetent. We then see Obi-Wan turn and shoot behind them for almost 2 full seconds. Why? There's no blaster fire coming at them from back there. By all accounts, there should be, but there isn't. We have no idea what Obi-Wan is shooting at. We have no idea if he hit anything. We have no idea why they didn't just give him his lightsaber and let him deflect the blaster fire coming from behind them. To make matters worse, when the camera cuts to show what's in front of them, lo and behold, there are stormtroopers there. Oh, but let's forget about them for a few seconds while Tala deals with these two, one of whom actually manages to get a shot off. What were they doing leading up to their untimely demises? Don't know, don't care, apparently. As far as the show is concerned, they only existed for this one shot. Okay, now we'll move back to the stormtroopers we saw earlier. 3 full seconds have passed since we saw them appear, and yet neither of them has done anything meaningful. They didn't move to cover. They didn't shoot. The one in back didn't even move to get a clear line of fire. I guess they just stood there until Obi-Wan was ready to shoot them. So you can guess what happens when they face off against 3 more stormtroopers. The first one manages to pull the trigger and misses by a country mile, because of course he does. Why exactly is this trooper running toward the 3 escapees while trying to shoot? Why doesn't he take cover behind this pile of whatevers and steady his blaster? Why, after he misses, does he then turn his blaster away from Tala and stop shooting, waiting a whole half second for her to shoot him? A half second. Really, Master Samwise? That's a very short amount of time. Well, yes, but actually no. Earlier, we saw Tala get off 2 shots in 8 frames, or about a quarter of a second. Then, when Obi-Wan shot behind him, for no determinable reason, we saw him get off 2 shots in just 5 frames, a sixth of a second. Things happen incredibly fast in combat, or at least they should. This stormtrooper, after missing his first shot, should be able to squeeze off at least 3 more rounds in the time Tala gives him before she shoots him, but he just doesn't. The final 2 troopers are taken out by Obi-Wan, and this is as bad as it gets. First off, the front stormtrooper has perfect cover right here, but he just jogs towards Obi-Wan without firing a shot. I can't. This is ridiculous. But it gets worse. Our final adversary, this last line of defense for the Empire, doesn't even remotely try to do anything. He just plods along, slowly ambling into Obi-Wan's line of fire. Look at him! Look at him waddle. Who hired this idiot? Why? Why is he acting like this? Why doesn't he shoot? Why doesn't he take the readily available cover? Why doesn't he do anything? Oh, and look at this. In this frame, Obi-Wan is about 2 floor tiles away from this pile of whatever, so he's at least like 10 feet away. In the very next frame, where he shoots the poor, incompetent trooper, he is even with said pile of whatever. No wonder they haven't been able to hit Obi-Wan. He can teleport thanks to the power of rushed and sloppy directing. To sum up, what we have just witnessed is a bunch of flashing lights with absolutely no narrative weight behind them. The stormtroopers don't do anything. Most of them don't even fire their weapons. They have absolutely no impact on the character's journey. Not one of our protagonists gets so much as grazed by a plasma bolt. They all escape completely unscathed. They are not forced to move from cover to cover, carefully weaving their way across the flight deck while Obi-Wan fends off their enemies' attacks. They simply run in a straight line. If none of these stormtroopers had been there, the outcome would have been the exact same. The troopers don't even delay them and let tension build during the scene, which is the role of the Imperial forces in Return of the Jedi on Andor. The stormtroopers, scout troopers, and ATSTs on the Forest Moon don't really sway the outcome, but they delay the rebels, keeping up the Death Star's shield for longer than expected, building tension during the battle and causing the disintegration of a good few rebel ships. When all your heroes are going to survive, the opposing forces need to at least appear to pose a threat, to cause the protagonists to divert from their plan in some way, to make things more difficult for them. Andor has the liberty of not needing any, save Cassian himself, of its good guys to survive, making this scene's path to achieving narrative weight quite a bit easier. We have come to know and understand at least a little bit about Taramyn and Lieutenant Gorn. We have learned how they sacrificed for years in service of the Sledging Rebellion, and yet they both drop without the slightest fanfare. Gorn's death at the very beginning, and then Taramyn's as he bolts for the cover of the ship, tell the audience in no uncertain terms this show means business. The characters who are still alive are in real danger. It is entirely possible that Cassian is the only one who makes it off this base alive, and the characters know this. We see the fear on Skeen's face as he prepares to provide covering fire, to briefly make himself vulnerable. I know I mentioned this moment earlier, but it's worth revisiting here. Note when Skeen ducks back into cover. When the blaster bolt hits the wall he's using for shelter, he is already pulling his blaster back, retreating to safety. He did not, as I kind of suggested earlier, stop covering Taramyn due to the incoming fire, but in anticipation of it. This is an important moment for Skeen's character. It shows his lack of total resolve, his lack of complete dedication to their mission. He'd rather stay safe for now, putting Taramyn's life at risk as a result, than risk his own life more than is perfunctorily necessary. And, as I've already noted, Skeen's cowardice does get Taramyn killed. Note how the Imperial soldier who kills Taramyn was aiming at Skeen's hiding place, but then changes targets. If Skeen had returned fire at this soldier, Taramyn likely would have made it to cover safely. Andor has now established rules. This is an actual firefight, not just a spectacle for spectacle's sake. There will be no theatrical, comically inept bad guys to be mowed down without a second thought. If Skeen and Vel are going to reach the ship, they are going to need to do more than simply run fast. Thankfully, Andor, the show and the character, deliver on that need when Nemik shoots the Imperial who was choking Cassian, allowing him to add his blaster to the fight. Between his extra covering fire and Vel shooting the vent and causing a smokescreen, Vel and Skeen are able to board the ship safely. The scene is a tad rushed here. We don't really see how any Imperials other than this one react to the steam, whether they change positions to get a better angle or anything, and we don't really see who Cassian and Nemik are shooting at, nor do we see when Skeen chose to break from cover, but these are pretty minor flaws in an otherwise excellently choreographed fight scene, where Andor's action scenes are tight, compact, hard-hitting, based in reality, and have actual narrative weight and impact on the overall plot and characters. These scenes from Obi-Wan Kenobi are simply fluff. Obi-Wan himself acts completely out of character, and his enemies almost unanimously act as if they've never used a blaster before. While Andor's scenes flow logically from one point to the next, each combatant's actions in accordance with their character and motivations. They have all the hallmarks of scenes that are well directed with significant thought put into the blocking and choreography, and as a result, there's hardly a contrivance or convenience to be found. Meanwhile, in Kenobi, stormtroopers drop their blasters and run willingly into the line of fire, indicating a directing style I can only describe as, who cares? Well, I care. You might want to level the criticism at me that I'm looking too much into these scenes, dissecting them frame by frame and all that. Star Wars is just meant to be entertainment, I hear you type. Don't analyze it so much. Just turn your brain off and enjoy it. To which I say, absolutely not. We are not supposed to be entertained, and I refuse to be entertained by a product that clearly had so little effort, so little love put into it. Movies and shows are mediums of storytelling. They are works of art. They should, when examined closely, make us appreciate them more. Take, for example, the moment I just mentioned, where we learn about Skeen's selfishness, his lack of commitment, by his hesitation and reluctance in providing covering fire. That is not something I noticed when I first watched this episode. I only discovered it upon closer examination, and it made me realize that Skeen's character was better developed than I previously thought. I just hadn't seen it all. The writers and directors of Andor spent far, far more time creating this show than I have analyzing it, so naturally there are details, everything from facial expressions to lines of dialogue, that will get past me at first, but when I discover them, will deepen my appreciation for the care that went into crafting this story. This is how we should approach shows, movies, and stories of any kind. We should want to learn from and be inspired by them. If we approach them as mere entertainment, something to keep our eyes and ears busy for an hour or two, what good are they? We might as well just watch a Windows 95 screensaver. I have so many more thoughts on this subject, so that will have to be its own video. For now, thank you so much for watching this absurdly detailed breakdown and comparison. Please leave your thoughts down below, and I will see you in the next one.